The man known to history as King Leonidas I of Sparta was born around 540 BC in the Greek city-state which he would one day rule. Between approximately 560 BC and 520 BC, his father, Anaxandridas II, was the 15th king of the Aegead line and governed Sparta for nearly 40 years. Anaxandridas, in conjunction with his co-king Ariston, governed Sparta as it solidified its status as the preeminent city-state in ancient Greece. The identity of Leonidas' mother remains undisclosed. However, Herodotus, a contemporaneous Greek historian, asserts that she was the niece of Anaxandridas, her spouse. Anaxandridas was ordered to divorce her and wed a woman capable of bearing children by the Council of Ephors, the most powerful magistrates in Sparta after the monarchs, because she had failed to produce an heir after several years of matrimony. After Anaxandridas declined, the Ephors granted him permission to enter into matrimony with a second spouse while maintaining his first marriage. Soon after, the monarch received his first son, a boy named Cleomenes, from his new wife. Following the successful delivery of his intended progeny through his second marriage, Anaxandridas reconciled with his first wife, who unexpectedly delivered 3 sons, Darius, Leonidas, and Cleombrotus, in rapid succession. Leonidas was born into the Aegead dynasty, which held the position of the more senior lineage of kings who governed Sparta together. Both lineages traced their lineage back to the legendary hero Heracles. It was not anticipated that, as the third son of King Anaxandridas II, he would ascend to the throne and become one of the most legendary figures of classical antiquity, but he ultimately did so. Notwithstanding this reputation, restricted information exists regarding the life of Leonidas. The histories of Herodotus, a historian from the 5th century BC regarded as the father of history due to its pioneering investigative approach to past events, serve as the primary source of the knowledge that is currently available. Nevertheless, the fact that Herodotus was notorious for embellishing his accounts of Greek history further complicates the task of determining the specifics of Leonidas' life. Ancient Greeks referred to the promontory of Sparta as Lacedaemon, which was situated in the southeastern region of the Peloponnese on the banks of the Eurotas River. The Isthmus of Corinth connected the Peloponnese to the rest of Greece. In the early stages of Greek history, the Achaeans, one of the 4 main Greek ethnic groups, established settlements in the Peloponnese. The legendary king Menelaus, who ruled Sparta, commanded his subjects during the Trojan War and fought to regain Helen, his wife, from the clutches of the Trojan prince Paris. It is said that Menelaus ruled from the hilltop city of Thermopylae, whereas the Eastern Dorians established classical Sparta on lower ground near the Eurotas. In contrast to other Greek city-states, Sparta lacked adequate urbanization and consisted primarily of a collection of communities. Patana, Limni, Messoa, and Cynosura comprised the rural settlements that comprised the city of Sparta. Collectively, the 4 municipalities and the one located to the south, Amyclae, comprised the city-state of Sparta. Sparta was governed concurrently by 2 kings of the Aegead and Europontid dynasties since the 900s BC. The Great Ratra, the Spartan constitution, is purportedly the work of the legendary figure Lycurgus, who instituted his reforms in the 7th century BC. In accordance with this governmental framework, the 2 monarchs of Sparta assumed the dual role of military commanders and were elected for life members of the Gerousia, a council of elders comprising 28 men aged 60 or older. The Gerousia, apart from functioning as the assembly's supreme court, deliberated on political matters prior to their submission for a vote and possessed the authority to veto decisions made by the assembly. All members of the assembly were full citizens of Sparta. They were all required to be of legitimate Spartan descent and had to complete arduous training in order to enlist in the Spartan army when they were young. The assembly elected annually a council of 5 ephors, one for each of the 5 villages, who occasionally superseded the monarchs but shared executive authority with them. Ephors occupied prominent positions in international affairs and exercised considerable authority as ambassadors. Additionally, the monarch was always accompanied on military campaigns by 2 ephors, who had the authority to prosecute him for any misconduct. By the mid-7th century BC, Sparta had accumulated an impressive hoplite army. Hoplites were 8-rank phalanxes of heavy infantrymen distinguished by a bronze-faced wooden round shield bearing the Greek letter lambda for lacedaemon. The shield was borne on the left arm. Greaves, a bronze breastplate, and a bronze abdominal protection accompanied their massive bronze helmet. In addition to their long wooden spear adorned with an iron point, they carried a short sword for close combat. In contrast to other Greek warriors, Spartan hoplites were characterized by their elongated crimson cloaks and long hair. Before embarking on campaigns, the monarchs of Sparta would perform sacrifices and consult with oracles, as the city-state was extremely religious. Spartan commanders were renowned for allocating time to make sacrifices in order to inform the decisions, even during intense battle. They possessed an exceptional perspective on mortality, regarding combat death as a badge of distinction and survival in defeat as a source of humiliation. Early on, these values and customs were ingrained in the Spartans. Boys of legitimate Spartan descent were separated from their families at the age of 7 and were required to participate in the agog system, where they were instructed in martial skills by young Spartan adults. Upon reaching the age of 18, the most promising graduates would enlist in an elite military unit, where they would assume positions such as 300-man royal bodyguards, senior army commanders, and ultimately contend for the gerousia. The agog was not applicable to any Spartan youths other than the crown heirs of the two royal houses. Since Leonidas was not the eldest son of his father, he would have participated in the rigorous training regimen alongside his siblings Darius and Cleombrotus. The Crypteia, a secret service overseen by the elite Spartans, served primarily to exert control over the helots, the lower stratum of Spartan society formerly originating from neighboring states like Messenia that were subjugated by the Spartans beginning in the 8th century. These helots were effectively exploited as slaves. The helots being significantly more numerous than the Spartans, the Spartan constitution incorporated provisions aimed at regulating their influence. In the autumn, following the inauguration of a new set of ethos, a proclamation of war against the helots was issued, permitting liberated Spartans to slaughter the helots without incurring retribution. Between the helots and the Spartans, a third class known as the perioeci comprised males from neighboring towns and villages who were free subjects of the Spartans and were obligated to serve in the army. Due to the prohibition on economic activity among the Spartans, the perioeci undertook the roles of merchants and artisans, producing armor and armaments for the Spartan military. Spatial across the Black Sea and Mediterranean coasts, extending from the Straits of Gibraltar in the west to present-day Georgia in the east, Sparta was among more than 1,000 city-states that comprised the Greek or Hellenic realm. Despite their common connections in language, culture, and religion, these communities operated as autonomous entities that frequently engaged in conflict regarding economic and territorial control. While the majority of Greeks resided in Europe, a sizable Greek population also existed in Western Asia and a limited number of settlements were established along the coast of North Africa, including Cyrene, the ancient name for Libya. A number of these city-states had transitioned to democratic governance by the 6th century. However, a few maintained monarchical systems or had fallen under the control of autocrats and despots. The fact that Sparta was a diarchy with two rulers was singular. At the time of Leonidas' birth, Thebes, Corinth, Argos, Sparta, and Athens were the most significant and potent city-states on the Greek mainland. Some of the colonies established by these city-states thereafter grew to be formidable city-states in their own right. Athens established Ephesus in Turkey, whereas Syracuse in Sicily was founded by Corinth. Originally referred to as Neapolis, modern-day Naples in Italy was founded by mariners from Rhodes. The sole overseas settlement established by Sparta was Taranto, which is located in southern Italy at present-day Taranto. In contrast to their contemporaries, the Spartans fulfilled their land requirements through their conquests of the adjacent regions of Laconia and Messenia to the west and south, respectively. By the mid-6th century BC, the Spartans had shifted their focus to the northern region of Arcadia. During the reign of Anaxandridas, the father of Leonidas, the Spartans approached the Arcadian city-state of Tegea in approximately 550 BC armed with chains to fetter the captives they anticipated capturing and rods to partition the territory they anticipated conquering. However, they were unexpectedly defeated and were ultimately confined to the same conditions as prisoners of war. Under the guidance of an ephor named Chilon, Sparta shifted its strategy from conquest to diplomacy in response to the defeat at the Battle of Phetas. The Spartans promptly asserted the discovery of the skeletal remains of Orestes and Tissamenus, renowned progeny and grandchildren of King Agamemnon, the preeminent Greek commander during the Trojan War and elder brother of Menelaus. Through the process of returning these remains to Sparta for interment, they asserted their right to the Peloponnese as well as the Achaean monarch's inheritance. By employing these strategies, among others, the Lacedaemonians successfully established a coalition with Tegea. During the latter half of the 6th century BC, the aforementioned diplomatic endeavors culminated in the establishment of the Peloponnesian League, an alliance. As the preeminent entity in the alliance, Sparta was not obligated to defend its allies in return. One significant Peloponnesian city-state that did not join the League was Argos, a long-standing adversary that repeatedly failed to contest the dominance of the Spartans in combat during the 6th century BC. In approximately 520 BC, the demise of Anaxandridas II precipitated a dispute over succession between his sons Cleomenes and Darius. Darius asserted his seniority by virtue of being the progeny of his father's first wife and by virtue of his military prowess as verified by the Agog. However, in adherence to custom, the Spartans recognized the elder Cleomenes as the legitimate monarch. Following his unsuccessful endeavor to seize the crown, Darius made subsequent unsuccessful attempts to establish a Spartan colony in North Africa and Sicily. However, his efforts came to an end when he was slain in a battle against the Carthaginians in Sicily around 510 BC. Cleomenes emerged as a formidable monarch whose sphere of influence spanned a significant portion of ancient Greece. He oversaw a land invasion of Athens in 510 BC that led to the expulsion of the despot Hippias and his sons. The Spartan intervention facilitated the establishment of a democratic government by the Athenian politician Cleisthenes. In 507 BC, Cleomenes acquiesced to the demands put forth by Isagoras, a pro-Spartan politician, to depose Cleisthenes and institute an oligarchy. Despite the Spartans' successful occupation of the Acropolis, the populace ascended to Cleisthenes' side and compelled the monarch to retreat. In the course of this, Isagoras was exiled. The subsequent year, in response to the unsuccessful intervention, Cleomenes and Damaratus, his co-king of the Eurypontid royal house, commanded a sizable Peloponnesian army in battle against Athens. The 506 BC campaign was a failure due to the army's disintegration, precipitated by the Corinthians' decision to withdraw their forces in the middle of the campaign and King Demaratus's subsequent abandonment of the army. Sparta consented, in the aftermath of the incident, to convene a Peloponnesian League Congress at which the allies could cast their votes in favor of or against military action. To mitigate potential future conflicts during campaigns, the Spartans amended their constitution to prohibit the co-leadership of the two reigning monarchs of the Spartan army. The Aegead and Eurypontid monarchs of Sparta, according to Herodotus, tended to view one another with suspicion and animosity. Furthermore, the disputes between Cleomenes and Damaratus after 506 BC were personal in nature. This animosity persisted for an extended period of time. After conquering Argos in battle in 494 BC, Cleomenes was tried for his failure to capture the city-state. Presumably, Damaratus was the driving force behind the endeavor. During this particular instance, Cleomenes effectively advocated for himself and was acquitted subsequent to his trial before the ephors. Subsequently, in 491 BC, Cleomenes deposed his co-king and bribed the oracle at Delphi to declare that Damaratus was the illegitimate son of his father King Ariston, thus justifying his deposition in the eyes of the divine. This transpired after another dispute between the two individuals. As the bribery was subsequently uncovered, Cleomenes allegedly degenerated into insanity and was exiled. The authorities subsequently recalled him to Sparta and apprehended him. Possibly among his accusers at that time were his brothers Leonidas and Cleombrotus. Soon after being placed in prison with a helot officer, he convinced one of the guards to provide him with a knife, at which point he committed suicide. Herodotus offers several alternative explanations for the king's insanity and suicide, with the most prevalent being that his bribery of the oracle at Delphi enraged the gods and that divine retribution was the cause of his descent into mania. Historian Paul Cartledge has proposed the notion that Clemen's demise may not have been the result of suicide, but rather was orchestrated by his half-brother Leonidas, who succeeded Cleomenes as King Leonidas I in 489 BC and was the heir apparent to the Aegead throne. Gorgo, the sole offspring of Cleomenes, was married to Leonidas at the time of his coronation. Gorgo's marriage would have occurred in the late 490s, when she was in her late teens, and Leonidas would have been around 50 years old at the time. Gorgo was estimated to have been born around 510 BC. It was not unusual for the Spartan regal houses to sanction matrimonial unions between close blood relatives. Leonidas' father and mother were, respectively, an uncle and niece. Moreover, considering that Gorgo was the only child of Cleomenes and was eligible to inherit his entire fortune, Leonidas would reunify a substantial portion of his father's estate, which had been partitioned among his 4 brothers. Towards the onset of the Greco-Persian Wars, when Greek city-states in Ionia on the western coast of modern-day Turkey clashed with the swiftly expanding Persian Empire, Leonidas ascended to the throne. Cyrus II of Anshan, a client monarch of the Median Empire ruled by his maternal grandfather monarch Astyages, established the Persian Empire in the 550s BC. Originally, both of these empires were situated in the vicinity of present-day Iran. Cyrus betrayed his grandfather in 553 BC, and by 550 BC he had seized Ecbatana, the capital of the Medians, deposing the Astyages and establishing himself as King of Kings. After becoming aware of this, King Croesus of Lydia, situated in western Anatolia, the region encompassing western Turkey along the coast of the Aegean Sea, consulted the Delphic oracle in an attempt to capitalize on the Medes' demise. The oracle predicted that an invasion would result in the destruction of a great empire. Cyrus' empire was invaded from the west by Croesus, who was certain of victory. However, in 546 BC, the Persian monarch launched a counteroffensive and conquered Lydia, deposing Croesus and transforming the region into a Persian province. Cyrus, who had also conquered Babylon in 539 BC, granted permission for the captive Jewish populace to repatriate to their ancestral abode in Jerusalem. The great king subsequently redirected his focus towards the east, where he successfully forged tributary alliances in India despite encountering generally more formidable opposition. In 530 BC, he allegedly perished in combat in Central Asia against an army commanded by Queen Tomaris of the Massagetei. Cambyses II, the progeny of Cyrus and successor to his father, successfully extended the Persian Empire's territorial reach to Egypt and the Levant in the course of his brief reign. A power struggle ensued after the death of Cambyses in 522 BC, culminating in Darius I's succession. Darius I, a formidable warrior who wed Atossa, the daughter of Cyrus, claimed to be distantly related to the Persian royal family. In approximately 515 BC, following his coronation at the capital of Pasargadae under Cyrus, he founded Persepolis, a ceremonial site situated in the Fars region of southern Iran. However, Susa, situated approximately 160 miles east of the Tigris River, served as the principal administrative hub. During his Scythian campaign in 513 BC, Darius constructed a pontoon bridge to facilitate the passage of his army through the Bosporus Straits and into European Thrace, an area encompassing portions of contemporary Bulgaria, northwestern Turkey, and northeastern Greece. Despite encountering formidable opposition from the nomadic Scythians, Darius successfully subdued the Thracians and compelled King Amyntas of Macedonia to be a vassal of his empire. The Persian Empire's northwest frontier was fortified by these recent conquests, which also provided a foundation for subsequent incursions into Greece. By 500 BC, Darius ruled over a vast multi-ethnic empire that included Greeks in the west and Indians in the east. In order to administrate the provinces more efficiently, he reorganized the various conquests that his father-in-law had amassed. In his honor, Darius established a universal currency known as the daric. Moreover, he partitioned the empire into approximately 20 satrapies, which were provinces ruled by satraps. In addition to military obligations, each of these administrators was obligated to levy a minimum annual tax or tribute. The satraps were entrusted with the responsibility of collecting these taxes and amassing military contingents on behalf of the great king. Despite adhering to Zoroastrianism and purporting to represent Ahura Mazda or Lord Wisdom, the Persian kings exhibited a generally benevolent stance towards other faiths. Their contentment was contingent upon receiving the taxes and tributes from their imperial subjects in every province. A considerable number of Greeks residing in Lydia and Ionia during the latter half of the 6th century BC had grown dissatisfied with Persian governance. In 499 BC, under the leadership of Aristagoras, tyrant of the city-state of Miletus in southeastern Anatolia, the Ionian revolt erupted. The rebels required alliances with the most powerful city-states on the Greek mainland in order to have any chance of defeating the mighty Persian Empire, despite the fact that several Greek regions stood up in rebellion. Aristagoras personally traveled to Sparta to petition King Cleomenes for assistance, falsely asserting that the Persians could be readily defeated. The Spartans had received requests for military assistance against the Persians on previous occasions. King Croesus of Lydia had acknowledged Sparta as the preeminent city-state in Greek history 50 years prior. In the 440s BC, when he encountered a counter-invasion of Lydia by Cyrus' armies, Croesus beseeched Sparta for military aid. However, in this particular instance, Sparta only dispatched a diplomatic envoy to advise Cyrus against further invading Lydia. The Lydian capital of Sardis had already been occupied by Cyrus prior to the arrival of the Spartan. Cleomenes inquired as to the duration required to reach Persia. Aristagoras replied that traversing Susa by land from Ionia would require 3 months. Upon Cleomenes' refusal attributed to the considerable distances involved, Aristagoras apprised the Spartan monarch of the Persian Empire's immense wealth and endeavored to induce him to accept his offer by progressively augmenting it. Herodotus records that Aristagoras ultimately presented Cleomenes with a substantial offer of 50 talents of silver, which was considered prodigious at the time. However, Gorgo, the daughter of Cleomenes and future wife of Leonidas, cautioned her father against succumbing to corruption and implored him to reject the foreigner. Gorgo was 10 years old at the time. Following Sparta's decline to lend a hand, Aristagoras journeyed to Athens with the identical arguments in an effort to secure assistance from the Athenian people. Given their recent survival of endeavors by the former tyrant Hippias to depose their nascent democracy with Persian assistance and their claim to leadership of the Ionian Greeks, the Athenians concurred with the revolt and coordinated with the Ionians and Eretrians to storm the Lydian capital of Sardis in 498 BC. The Persians defeated the allies at the Battle of Ephesus later that year, and in response, Athens severed ties with the alliance. Until the Persian fleet defeated the Ionians at the naval combat of Lade near Miletus in 494 BC, the uprising persisted. As soon as he regained authority over Ionia, Darius devised a strategy to invade Greece for 2 reasons. First, to exact vengeance on Athens and Eretria for their support of the rebels, and second, to mitigate the risk that the Greek city-states would unite to once more assault the empire. Thus, Mardonius, the nephew and son-in-law of Darius, led a campaign in 492 BC to re-establish Persian authority over Thrace and coerce Macedonia into ceding its former autonomy. However, Subsequent Persian incursions into Greece were thwarted when the majority of the Persian fleet was sunk near Mount Athos. The Persian monarch dispatched ambassadors to all Greek states the following year in an effort to compel their submission to Persian authority. By slaying the Persian envoys, Athens and Sparta demonstrated their refusal to submit, but a direct confrontation between the Greeks and the Persians was imminent. In 491 BC, King Cleomenes of Sparta endeavored to establish an anti-Persian alliance between Athens and the nearby island city-state of Aegina, which had recently ceded to Persia. However, his endeavors to foster Greek unity against the Persian threat were thwarted by King Demaratus of Sparta, who criticized his co-king for supporting Athens, a city-state that had recently capitulated to Persia, in opposition to Aegina, a long-standing ally of Sparta. The conspiracy between Demaratus and Cleomenes directly precipitated the latter's scheme to depose the former. Following public ridicule at the hands of his successor Leonidas II, Demaratus fled to Persia, where King Darius granted him land in refuge. Darius initiated an amphibious assault against Greece in 490 BC, under the leadership of his nephew Artaphernes and a general named Dates. Following their triumphant destruction of Eretria, the Persian forces shifted their focus towards Athens. Despite being a burgeoning naval power, the Athenians were devoid of the necessary capabilities to thwart the Persian army's approach to the harbor of Marathon, located approximately 25 miles east of Athens. The long-distance runner Pheidippides was dispatched by the Athenians to beg Sparta for assistance. It is unknown whether Cleomenes or Leonidas was king at the time, but the Spartans agreed to dispatch 2,000 hoplites when the Athenian arrived after running over 150 miles in 48 hours. They insisted, however, that they were unable to depart until the conclusion of a religious festival that was taking place in Sparta at the time. Due to this, the Athenians and Persians had already engaged in the Battle of Marathon when these Spartans arrived. Miltiades, who had governed an Athenian colony in Thrace and fought under Darius during his Scythian campaign in 513 BC prior to siding with Aristagoras in the Ionian Revolt, commanded the Athenian army. Miltiades, fortified with his knowledge of Persian warfare, organized his forces in order to obstruct the departures from the plain of Marathon. The Persians, after several days, made the decision to sail their army directly to Athens. As the Persian cavalry prepared to set sail, Miltiades directed his 10,000-man army in an assault on the flanks of the Persian infantry, which subsequently reoriented towards the center. During the conflict, more than 6,000 Persians perished, while 192 Athenians and an undetermined number of casualties among allies of Athens from Plataea were lost. The Persians repatriated after abandoning their plans to conquer Athens. This was the context in which Leonidas ascended to the throne of Sparta alongside the other monarch. Little is known about the events that transpired in Sparta during the 480s BC following the reign of Leonidas. Despite the Persians' humiliation at Marathon, the Spartans, Athenians, and other civilizations had every reason to believe they would soon return. Darius passed away in 486 BC without having accomplished his goal of subjugating Greece. His son Xerxes succeeded him. Upon successfully reinstating internal harmony throughout his empire, he resolved to conclude the task that his father had begun too late and organized a military campaign to definitively vanquish and subjugate the Greeks. In approximately 484 BC, word of these preparations reached Sparta. 7 years after murdering the Persian envoy dispatched by Darius, the Spartans resolved to atone for their sacrilegious action by sending a human sacrifice to the Persians. This was done in an effort to placate the gods for their earlier transgression. 2 men volunteered for the sacrificial mission and were both dispatched on the voyage. However, upon their arrival at Xerxes' court in Susa and apprising the great king of their intended sacrifice, Xerxes dismissed their proposal with laughter and regarded it as a jest. Although the 2 Spartans' lives might have been spared due to the cultural misunderstanding, preparations for the invasion of Greece continued as planned. During Mardonius's invasion of 492 BC, Xerxes ordered the excavation of a canal through Mount Athos in northeastern Greece as part of his preparations in an effort to avert a catastrophe similar to the one that befell the Persian fleet while attempting to circumnavigate the Athos promontory. Xerxes also directed the construction of a waterway bridge across the Bosporus or Hellespont, mirroring the feat accomplished by Darius during his initial conquest of Thrace over 2 decades prior. In contrast to his father, Xerxes implemented measures to thwart any attempts at subversion of these invasion schemes by forbidding the participation of his Greek subjects in the undertaking. Conversely, he issued a directive for his Phoenician and Egyptian subjects to fasten the vessels with substantial papyrus rope. A substantial contingent of Greek subjects, including the Thracians and Macedonians, was also at Xerxes' disposal. Numerous Greek city-states that maintained monarchies opted for the Persian Empire's protection over the possibility of being overthrown by a democratic revolution. It is probable that a greater number of Greeks fought for Xerxes than against him in 480 BC, notwithstanding Herodotus's efforts to create the illusion of a unified Greek resistance against this latest Persian invasion. Prior to the other Greek city-states, Sparta received a warning regarding an impending Persian invasion. As per the accounts of Herodotus and his exile in the Persian Empire, the deposed king Demaratus maintained his patriotistic sentiments towards Sparta and resolved to issue a prodigious warning. To maintain the secrecy of the message, he inscribed it onto a tablet of wood and then covered it with wax. Everyone in Sparta was perplexed as to its significance when it arrived, but Gorgo, the wife of Leonidas, surmised that the wax contained a hidden message and advised removing it. As soon as the wax was completely consumed, the Spartans discerned Demaratus's message and disseminated the admonition to the other city-states of Greece. Although Sparta and its Peloponnesian League allies possessed a formidable land-based military, the Greeks remained devoid of a significant naval force. In the 480s BC, Themistocles, the preeminent Athenian statesman and most influential politician, ardently advocated for the development of Athens' naval capabilities as a preventive measure against a Persian invasion fleet. The year 483 BC saw Themistocles capitalize on the silver mines at Laurium, where he discovered a rich seam. He then advised the Athenian assembly that the silver should be utilized to fund the development of a fleet consisting of 100 to 200 new triremes, which were renowned for their speed and agility and were derived their name from the 3 layers of oars. Given the current perceived remoteness of the Persian threat, Themistocles asserted that the fleet was intended for engagement with Aegina, an adversary that had defeated Athens on multiple occasions at sea since the latter allied with the Persians in 491 BC. By voting in favor of the proposal, the assembly authorized Athens to construct a fleet capable of engaging the Persians. Therefore, as Xerxes neared his last preparations for the invasion of Greece in 480 BC, the oracle situated at Delphi was capable of delivering the following message to envoys from Athens: "The wooden wall shall remain unconquered, although their city would perish." While certain Athenians argued that the oracle's reference pertained to the hedges that once encircled the Acropolis, Themistocles persuaded his compatriots to entrust their confidence in his navy, which he perceived to be the wooden wall mentioned in the oracle. Amidst religious, linguistic, and cultural ties, in 481 BC, delegates from Greek city-states uniting in opposition to the impending Persian invasion convened at the Isthmus of Corinth, a narrow landmass separating northern Greece from the Peloponnese. It was at this juncture that they reached a consensus on a defensive alliance. 50% of the 31 city-states comprising the alliance were Peloponnesian League members or had some other affiliation with Sparta. Sparta was the undisputed coalition leader due to its preeminent position among the city-states. Throughout the conflict, allied Greek forces were led by Spartan military commanders on both land and sea, despite the fact that the Spartans were not renowned for their naval prowess. However, King Leonidas' credentials to command the allied army were indisputable on land. During the spring of 480 BC, Xerxes successfully guided his invasion force across the Hellespont via the pontoon bridges that he had laboriously built the year prior. Herodotus asserted that the invasion force comprised more than 2 million men. However, considering the military capabilities of the Persian Empire during that period, it is improbable that Xerxes' army surpassed 200,000 soldiers. According to Herodotus, the invasion force comprised of as many as 60 ethnic groups. These included Bactrians from the region surrounding modern-day Afghanistan, Persians, Medes, and Parthians from Iran, Indians from what is now the Punjab, and a vast array of other subject peoples, including the Lydians, Arabians, Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and many Greeks. Under the command of a nobleman named Hydarnes, the 10,000-strong royal bodyguard known as the Immortals comprised the Persian army. As stated by Herodotus, the Persian fleet comprised more than 1,000 vessels, of which substantial contingents originated from the Phoenicians, Egyptians, Cypriots, and the king's Asian Greek subjects, totaling over 300 vessels. 5 of the latter were under the command of Artemisia, the reigning queen of Halicarnassus. The prodigious Persian army advanced sluggishly across northern Greece, a circumstance exacerbated in part by the lengthy supply train traversing the region and in part by Xerxes' intention to convince hesitant Greeks to submit to Persian rule by establishing an aura of inexorable triumph through the force of its formidable presence. The Persians advanced towards the Vale of the Tempe, situated at the frontier of Thessaly and Macedonia, in July. A 10,000-man allied Greek army, led by the Spartan Leonidas and the Athenian Themistocles, stood in anticipation of the invading force. Upon notifying the allied army of Xerxes' impending arrival, King Alexander I of Macedonia not only disclosed the overwhelming quantities of men and ships comprising the invading force but also cautioned Themistocles and Leonidas that the allied defenses might be breached. The 10,000-strong allied army withdrew in response to this information and reconvened at the Isthmus of Corinth to continue their deliberations. The capitulating Thessalians readily acquiesced to the Persians, thereby facilitating Xerxes' uninterrupted advance southward. The Persian fleet proceeded in the interim to Cape Sepias, which was in opposition to the island of Euboea. Following their retreat from their initial defensive position, the Greek allies made the decision to oppose the Persians through land at the pass of Thermopylae and by sea at the northernmost point of Euboea's Cape Artemisium. Notwithstanding the dire military circumstances, the Greek coalition encountered a predicament due to the religious calendar, which dictated the Olympic Games to be held in August. The Olympian Games, one of 4 Pan-Hellenic games celebrated in Zeus' honor as ruler of the gods, drew athletes and spectators from throughout ancient Greece. In addition to their religious duties, Spartans were also making preparations for the yearly Carnae festival, which was held in veneration of the deity Apollo. However, in their capacity as leaders of the anti-Persian coalition, the Spartans were obligated to dispatch an army to Thermopylae as a symbolic act of defiance. Failure to do so would have resulted in the coalition disintegrating, with individual city-states defecting to Xerxes in opposition to his advancing army. In addition, the Spartans had sought guidance from the oracle located at Delphi, which predicted that either the Persians would conquer Sparta or they would be in mourning over the loss of a monarch. In light of these factors, Sparta dispatched King Leonidas and a 300 hoplite contingent to defend Thermopylae. While this represented only a fraction of the approximately 8,000 available Spartan combatants, the majority of the 300 would have been members of the royal bodyguard's elite unit. Additionally, Leonidas mandated that his companions bear a surviving son, which could indicate that the king was certain, possibly as a result of the oracle's proclamation, that he and his 300 men were doomed to perish in combat. Consequently, his objective was to guarantee that the family line of each of the 300 males could be perpetuated through their living sons. Upon departing for Thermopylae, Leonidas counseled his wife Gorgo to marry a good man and have good sons, despite the fact that they already had Pleistarchus, a young son. Leonidas and the 300 undertook the march to Thermopylae, possibly cognizant of the impending tragedy that awaited him there. In the year 484 BC, 2 men volunteered to make a self-sacrificial offering to the Persians in pursuit of peace. However, their actions were misconstrued by the Xerxes. Misunderstandings of this nature were diminished throughout Xerxes' invasion in 480 BC, as he was accompanied by a notable Spartan advisor named Demaratus, who had himself been deposed from the throne of Sparta by Cleomenes 11 years prior. The great king inquired earlier in the campaign as to whether or not the Greeks would be inspired to resist. In his response, Demaratus asserted that his fellow Spartans will fight as no others, regardless of the number of adversaries versus the number of opponents, and that they were accustomed to remaining in formation and striving for victory or death, refusing to retreat from the battlefield even when outnumbered. Xerxes, on the other hand, foolishly disregarded the very notion that men would voluntarily engage in such valiant combat. Alongside the 300 elite hoplites, the Spartan army comprised an equivalent number of helots and approximately 1,000 perioeci. Small contingents of Peloponnesian allies bolstered these, enabling Leonidas to advance towards Thermopylae with an estimated 4,000 men. The coalition army encountered 1,100 Boeotians and contingents from the adjacent Locrians and Phocians, each of which contributed approximately 1,000 men, as they neared the pass in northern Greece. Leonidas gathered these disparate contingents into a single army of approximately 7,000 men at Thermopylae, where they were standing in anticipation of the Persian onslaught. The Greek meaning of the name Thermopylae is hot gates. This delineates a constricted passageway separating the Calliroman Massif, a western mountain range, from the Gulf of Maliarchos, situated to the east. 3 of these gates traverse the region. At the narrowest portion of the pass, the middle gate, a 15 to 20 meter stretch, was where Leonidas stationed the majority of his forces. The gate was already fortified with a Phocian wall when the Greeks arrived. They immediately initiated restoration work on it. Men from Trachis promptly notified Leonidas of the existence of Anopia, a narrow mountain path that circumnavigated the pass and emerged in front of the Greek position via the east gate. As a consequence, the Spartan king directed his 1,000-strong Phocian army to protect the narrow path, where men could at times only proceed in single file. Officially under the command of the Spartan Eurybiades, but in practice under the command of Themistocles, the Greek fleet at Artemisium defended against any maritime assault by the Persian fleet against the Greek position. Their home cities might have hoped that the Xerxes would not reach until the conclusion of the Olympic Games, giving Leonidas' Peloponnesian allies sufficient time to mobilize their full contingents for the battle at Thermopylae. However, the Persian army arrived during the religious festivities in mid-August. During this critical moment, the Peloponnesians proposed to Leonidas that they withdraw to the Isthmus of Corinth, where they could await the arrival of additional reinforcements. The king of Sparta considered this for a moment, but local Locrians and Phocians' objections to the idea of being abandoned to confront the Persians alone compelled Leonidas to maintain his army at Thermopylae and immediately dispatch messengers to allied city-states in order to request reinforcements. At this time, a soldier complained to Leonidas that the Persian army was so vast that its missiles would obscure the sun, which became a famous incident. The Spartan king, unfazed by the magnitude of the situation, remarked that the Greeks would have no trouble battling in the shadows if this were to occur. Nevertheless, Herodotus ascribes the utterance to Dionysus, a Spartan warrior. During his army's deployment at the western terminus of the pass, Xerxes dispatched a reconnaissance mounted on a horse to ascertain the activities of the Greeks. A small number of Greeks were observed performing gymnastic exercises in their pants, while others were grooming their long hair, according to the scout's report. The great king, astounded by the report, compelled Demaratus to provide an explanation for this ostensibly impolite conduct. Demaratus promptly identified these individuals as Spartans and apprised Xerxes that their hairdressing was an integral component of a ritualistic prelude to a final battle. At this point, Xerxes had developed a mistrust of Demaratus and disregarded this admonition, disproving the claim that these men were the most courageous and noblest among the Greeks. With the expectation that Leonidas and his men would eventually retreat, Xerxes exercised patience for a duration of 4 to 5 days prior to his ultimate determination to launch an assault on August 17, 480 BC. Prior to doing so, he dispatched an envoy to Leonidas with the promise of freedom and territories in Asia in exchange for the Greek surrender. Upon being rejected, the Persian envoy returned bearing a message from Xerxes demanding the surrender of Leonidas and his men's weaponry. The king of Sparta replied with a two-word challenge that was notably succinct: "Mochen labe," come and seize them. In response to Leonidas' challenge, Xerxes dispatched a Median contingent of 2,000 soldiers, comprising some of the most elite soldiers in his army, to engage the Greeks. Hundreds of Medes perished in the conflict with the Spartan hoplites, whose heavily armed forces impeded their ability to advance. The Median javelins were considerably shorter in length compared to the hoplite spears, and the pass at Thermopylae's limited confines rendered the Persians' numerical advantage null and void. Furthermore, the Spartans possessed a tactical edge, and Leonidas was able to rotate his troops at regular intervals along the front line behind the Phocean wall due to their exemplary discipline and determination to ensure optimal combat performance. Additionally, Leonidas effectively issued orders for his troops to feign retreats prior to reorienting them and delivering maximum damage to the enemy forces that had initiated a disorderly advance. Xerxes, growing increasingly frustrated by his army's inability to surmount the opposition of a diminutive Greek hoplite army, dispatched his elite immortals into the conflict. However, despite their prowess, they were unable to advance against the fortification of Spartan shields and ultimately withered with heavy casualties. Consequently, the initial day of hostilities came to a close. At the conclusion, Xerxes recognized that he was confronted with a legitimate dilemma. Xerxes continued his frontal assault of the pass on the second day of combat, launching wave after wave of troops against the Greek hoplite fortification. A local man named Ephialtes ventured into the Persian camp and presented vital information that would empower the Persians to prevail in the conflict, as the Persian king lamented a second day of futile efforts. The notorious traitor informed Xerxes that it was feasible to bypass the Greek position by traversing the narrow Anopia mountain path, anticipating a tremendous recompense from the great king. Xerxes immediately investigated this possibility and tasked Hydarnes with organizing a special mission for his immortals. Under the leadership of Ephialtes, Hydarnes and his men ascended the mountain path during the wee hours of the night after departing at twilight. Ahead of schedule on the third day of combat, the Phocean contingent, which had been dispersed by Leonidas to protect the route, awoke early to discover the immortals advancing unexpectedly. Upon hearing this, they hurriedly gathered their weapons in preparation for the battle. Hydarnes, equally taken aback, harbored concerns that these individuals might be Spartans. However, he was reassured by Ephialtes that they were not, and the immortals proceeded to breach the inexperienced Phocean hoplites before entering the Thermopylae Pass located east of the Middle Gate. Due to these developments, Leonidas and his men encountered the peril of becoming ensnared in a pincer to the east and west on the morning of the third day. The Spartan regal diviner Megistius foresaw the impending demise of his subject during the sacrificial observance that morning, which was to be expected. As their position became untenable, Leonidas and his subordinate commanders deliberated on the best course of action. According to the account provided by Herodotus, Leonidas abandoned his allies when he realized they were no longer interested in continuing the battle. The king made the decision to persist in the conflict alongside the remaining Boeotians, the Perioeci, and Helots, which amounted to 300 Spartans. It is likewise probable, if not more so, that the Allied forces withdrew in terror in the absence of any directives from Leonidas. The Spartans' determination to remain and battle until the bitter end was fitting of their warrior culture, and Leonidas may have been influenced to remain as well by the oracle's prophecy that Sparta could only be spared from the Persian horde if a Spartan king perished. At 9 o'clock in the morning of the third day of combat, Xerxes initiated his assault, while the remainder of Leonidas' army prepared to eat breakfast that morning. He is said to have instructed them, "This evening, we shall dine in Hades." The final Greek stand was formed by Leonidas and the remaining forces in opposition to the Phocean Wall. They fought as if they had nothing but their lives at stake and inflicted more enemy casualties than during the previous 2 days. The Greeks, whose spears had broken, attacked the enemy while holding their swords in hand and engaged in hand-to-hand combat. In the midst of the melee, King Leonidas was killed, and the Persians and Greeks fought over the corpse of the fallen monarch. Despite the initial success of the Greeks in recovering the remains of their fallen commander, they were ultimately unable to do so after being trapped in the rear following their outflanking maneuver. The remaining Greek forces retreated to a small hill, where they continued to fight until the end. Only the Thebans capitulated to the Persians. Only 2 of the 300 Spartans that accompanied Leonidas to Thermopylae managed to survive. Neither of them participated in the conflict. Pantites, who had been absent due to a diplomatic mission to Thessaly dispatched by Leonidas, hanged himself in humiliation upon realizing he had missed the battle. Aristodemus, the second warrior, was rendered impotent in combat by an eye infection. Despite the fact that a fellow 300th Day member named Eurytus had been afflicted with the same ailment, he directed his helot attendant to accompany him into the conflict and serve as his eyes upon the battlefield, whereupon he was ultimately consumed. Aristodemus encountered disgrace from his compatriots upon his repatriation to Sparta. The subsequent year, during the Battle of Plataea, he endeavored to redeem himself by breaking ranks and advancing alone into the enemy's midst. Although the Greeks suffered losses of up to 4,000 men at Thermopylae, more than 20,000 Persians, including 2 of Xerxes' half-brothers, perished in the conflict. Xerxes, enraged by the amount of blood he had to shed to vanquish such a small enemy force, ordered the beheading of the corpse of Leonidas and the amputation of his head from a pole as soon as the Persians retrieved it. Herodotus' observation that the Persians customarily accorded reverence to the remains of slain enemy warriors demonstrated Xerxes' utmost indignation over Leonidas' ability to lead the resistance at Thermopylae. The demise of Leonidas resulted in his juvenile son Pleistarchus assuming the throne. Cleombrotus, the younger brother of the deposed monarch, succeeded Pleistarchus as regent and assumed command of the coalition's land forces in the Peloponnese. During the time that Leonidas and his limited army fought at Thermopylae, 271 Greek triremes engaged an up to 800-ship Persian fleet at Artemisium. The Greeks sank 30 hostile vessels on the first day of combat, while a Persian detachment that was encircled the eastern coast of Euboea in an attempt to outflank the Greeks was shipwrecked. The Persian fleet launched a sustained assault on the Greek fleet following a day of relative calm. Throughout the day, both parties sustained significant losses. Upon learning of the defeat at Thermopylae, Themistocles determined that remaining at Artemisium was no longer advantageous from a strategic standpoint. As a result, he issued the order for the fleet to retreat to Salamis, which is situated to the west of Athens on the Saronic Gulf. In order to position his forces for an assault on the Isthmus of Corinth, Cleombrotus issued orders for his troops to construct a defensive wall throughout the area and to demolish the road that traversed it. Athenian citizens were, however, ordered to abandon their city and evacuate to Salamis due to the fact that Athens was situated in the Attica region beyond the wall. Themistocles, however, was able to utilize the Athenian fleet to aid in the concluding stages of the evacuation. Xerxes ordered the destruction of the city following the defeat of the few remaining Athenians who had barricaded themselves on the Acropolis. In accordance with this decree, the Athenian Acropolis was demolished, thus confirming an additional prophecy affirmed by the Delphic oracle. Despite the unsuccessful outcome of Leonidas' stand at Thermopylae and the continued advance of Xerxes' army, the Greeks were motivated to continue the battle by the pass's valiant defense. Moreover, the 3 days of combat at Thermopylae gave Themistocles invaluable time to inflict substantial damage upon the Persian fleet. The Spartans and their Peloponnesian allies predicted that the forthcoming stage of the conflict would mirror the previous 2, the struggles for Artemisium and Thermopylae, with the Peloponnesian army vying for control of the choke point at the Isthmus of Corinth, while the Allied navy maintained naval pressure on the Persian fleet at Salamis. Themistocles, on the other hand, held the belief that the conflict could be resolved through the destruction of the Persian fleet. Despite having commanded a fleet of nearly 400 ships and having received reinforcements since Artemisium, Themistocles continued to be outnumbered by the Persians. In late September, the Allied navy defeated the Persians decisively at the Battle of Salamis by destroying more than 200 enemy vessels. The naval engagement symbolized a pivotal moment in the conflict and compelled Xerxes to evacuate a significant portion of his army and return to his homeland out of apprehension that the Greek fleet might breach his pontoon bridges and ensnare him in Greece via its navigation up the Hellespont. Despite Xerxes' personal withdrawal from the campaign, the Persian occupation of a significant portion of the Greek peninsula persisted as the war continued. A substantial military contingent was abandoned by the Great King, which was spearheaded by his cousin Mardonius, who had previously invaded Thrace in 492 BC. Mardonius opted to withdraw from Attica and spend the winter in Thessaly, whereas the Athenians reinstated their capital city and the Peloponnesians maintained their position beyond the Isthmus Wall. Due to their lack of protection from the Isthmus Wall, the Athenians exhorted the Spartans to attack and defeat Mardonius with an army led northward. The Athenians withdrew their navy from the Allied fleet in response to the Spartans' refusal, allowing King Leonidas of Sparta to assume command. Early in 479 BC, Mardonius attempted to capitalize on the discord among the allies by sending a peace offer to the Athenians that promised them freedom. However, this offer was rejected, and the Persian general was compelled to retake Athens and obliterate the city entirely. Athenian refugees beseeched the Spartans for military aid, threatening to accept Persian conditions in the absence of such assistance. Cleombrotus returned to Sparta shortly after supervising the completion of the Isthmus Wall. He perished thereafter, leaving his son Pausanias in the role of regent and commander of the Allied army. Pausanias amassed an army of approximately 70,000 men, which was accompanied by 8,000 Athenian hoplites as they advanced north from the isthmus. Amidst Mardonius's aspiration to engage in combat on the expansive plains in the vicinity of Plataea, Pausanias successfully established a strategic vantage point atop the heights that provided an overlook of the Persian camp. Several days passed as the two armies engaged in combat before the Greeks made the strategic decision to retreat in order to protect their communication routes. Mardonius led his army to the heights in pursuit as the Greeks withdrew in various directions. However, similar to the situation at Thermopylae, the Persian hoplites, despite their limited weaponry, quickly overwhelmed the Greek hoplites. Mardonius, along with more than half of his army of approximately 120,000 men, perished in the battle. Approximately at the same time, King Leonidas pursued the Persian fleet into battle and converged upon it near the base of Mount Mycale in Ionia. The Persian seamen, rather than engaging in combat from the damaged ships, joined a sizable army that Xerxes had abandoned in the area and engaged the Spartans on foot, with predictable results. The invasion was abandoned after the decisive victories at Plataea and Mycale put an end to Xerxes and his successors' further attempts to invade Greece. In remembrance of Leonidas, the Greeks erected a stone lion at Thermopylae near the site where he fell, following the Persians' withdrawal from Greece. Additionally, a monument was erected in honor of the deceased, bearing an epitaph penned by the poet Simonides. It read, "Go inform the passing strangers of the Spartans that we lie here, in accordance with our laws." Approximately 40 years subsequent to the battle, a Spartan expedition dispatched to Thermopylae unearthed the purported remains of Leonidas and returned him to Sparta in preparation for a solemn funeral rites. In contrast to the Spartans, who regarded all deceased monarchs as semi-divine beings worthy of worship, Leonidas was later honored with an annual festival called the Leonidaea. The cult of Leonidas in ancient Sparta was centered around the Leonidaeon, a structure that potentially housed the mausoleums of Pausanias and Leonidas, the two most illustrious Spartan heroes of the Persian Wars. Despite the paucity of information regarding his life, Leonidas served as a reminder to the Spartans of their former grandeur in the centuries following his death. The Roman emperors drew inspiration from the Spartan warrior tradition, and in the early 2nd century AD, during the tenure of Emperor Trajan, the Leonidas festival was revived. Plutarch, a Greek historian and biographer, composed a biography of Leonidas that has sadly perished. The influence of Leonidas transcends the boundaries of antiquity. The independent city-states that were at risk of invasion by France and Germany during the Italian Renaissance drew inspiration from Leonidas and the 300 as defenders of liberty against foreign tyranny. During the late 16th century, Michel de Montaigne, an accomplished French essayist, expressed the view that Greek triumphs over Persia, including Salamis and Plataea, were insignificant when compared to the glorious defeat of King Leonidas and his men in the Pass of Thermopylae. This sentiment was echoed in 1814 by Jacques-Louis David, a French neoclassical painter who completed a canvas depicting Leonidas at Thermopylae. Despite initial perplexity on the part of his patron Napoleon Bonaparte regarding David's selection of a defeated ancient warrior as his heroic subject, Bonaparte ultimately came to appreciate the significance of the Spartans' patriotic sacrifice. Given that David concluded his painting subsequent to Napoleon's valiant yet ultimately unsuccessful campaign safeguarding France against an invasion orchestrated by a coalition of Austrian, Prussian, and Russian armies, the example would have appeared to be highly pertinent. Lord Byron, an English romantic poet renowned for his epic poem Don Juan and subsequent demise in the pursuit of Greek liberation, bemoans the dearth of bravery that befell his contemporaries in Greece. Earth, render back from your breasts a vestige of our fallen Spartans. Only 3 of the 300 grants were used to create a new Thermopylae during the summer of 1940, as the Royal Air Force confronted the German Luftwaffe over the skies of southern England. Winston Churchill uttered the remark, "Never in the annals of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few." However, Nazi Germany also claimed the legacy of Sparta, in addition to the Allies. An underclass of helots and a pure-born masterclass of warriors constituted Spartan society, which inspired Hitler's racial utopia. In describing the German Sixth Army encircled by the Soviets at Stalingrad, Hermann Göring alluded to the grandeur of the 300. The legacy of the Spartans continues to be a subject of controversy and complexity, exemplified most notably by the actions of Leonidas and the 300. The 300 have been historically recognized as the valiant soldiers of Thermopylae, whereas the helots and perioeci, compelled to comply with Leonidas' directives to engage in a bloody battle, have been largely overlooked. Despite the proliferation of legends surrounding the life of Leonidas throughout the centuries, astonishingly little is known about him. Being the 3rd offspring of King Anaxandridas, he, along with his 2 brothers, underwent the demanding Agog training regimen. His upbringing emphasized the tenets of Spartan warrior culture, which encompassed a profound respect for life and death. Leonidas wed Gorgo, the progeny of his half-brother King Cleomenes, at approximately 50 years of age. Shortly thereafter, Gorgo potentially played a role in the deposition and demise of Cleomenes, which precipitated his elevation to the position of co-king of Sparta. He would have been a prominent figure in the deliberations of the Spartans regarding how to confront the Persian threat. However, his significance remains obscured until the Persian invasion of 480 BC. In spite of the insurmountable numerical disadvantages, he ordered his army, which was under strength due to religious obligations and a reluctance to confront the vast Persian horde, to make a stand at Thermopylae. Over the course of 2 full days, the Greek army inflicted significant damage on the Persian army and demonstrated unbreakable resistance. Notwithstanding being outflanked, he persisted in his determination to extricate his entire army and engaged in a last-ditch rearguard operation, which incurred an unbalanced number of enemy casualties but ultimately resulted in his surrender. Despite suffering a loss at Thermopylae, Leonidas and his army served as a source of inspiration for the Greeks, who ultimately prevailed over the Persians at Salamis and Plataea. What is your assessment of Spartan King Leonidas I? Did he advocate for the protection of liberty against a tyrannical imperial foe, Or did he govern a state that oppressed and humiliated its subjects on a regular basis to preserve the privileges and culture of a small warrior elite? Please let us know in the comment section, and in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.